What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the third-person and action RPG tutorial series, we're going to be going over the initial setup for the ping system. So pings are to set little markers in the world, and they can be for you, or they could be for teammates in a multiplayer scenario. Really, they're just used for communication and tracking. So for example, if I am to say, I want to ping there's an item over here. Now, this little triangle is my ping at the moment. It is actually the same thing as my enemy icon on my minimap, and I just made it a sprite and put it in the world at the location that gets hit. And so essentially whatever we are looking at, the center of our camera, we don't have crosshairs yet, so it's a little hard to tell where that's at. We draw a line, and wherever it hits, it will create this ping. Now the ping is huge, doesn't need to be that big, it's just about as big as the character. But we can ping whatever we want and track data about that object. So I hit this platform, that's my ping. I can ping the enemy, that's my ping. And so these can be really useful. Of course, they can be a lot more advanced. Once we get the ping being placed in the world, like in this episode, we can then go about toggling these pings off or having them disappear after a certain amount of time, as well as relaying information back to the user about what we pinged. So if we ping an enemy, it could give us the enemy's name, or the character could say a voice line, for example. That's what we're going to be covering in today's episode. But before we do, if you want to get caught up in this series, I'll link you to this playlist right here. This is the entire third-person and action RPG tutorial series. You can check out everything we've done and how we've gotten to this point in the tutorial, including our weapons and inventory, our quests, and a lot more. Alternatively, if you only care about the ping system, I would recommend you check out this episode right here, which is where we initially set up the behavior for the camera in the third-person tutorial series, so you can see what logic we're using to draw this line to actually trigger the ping where we're looking. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series. Before we hop into any logic today, though, we want to go to Edit, Project Settings, and we want to add an input for our ping. So whatever button we want to press to perform a ping. Scroll down to My Inputs. Of course, you can do this with regular input actions like I'm doing here, or you could use Enhanced Input, which I have content on if you want to see that. For me, I'm going to keep using the regular action mappings for now, since I've done that for pretty much the rest of this series. And I've added a new one called Ping that I can use on either the keyboard or the controller, since we now have gamepad and controller support in our game. So press plus to add a new action mapping. You can call it Ping, and then add as many inputs as you want to trigger this command. And so I have the 5 key on the keyboard, and then I added another one and added the gamepad left shoulder will allow me to ping. Once you have your control set up, you can close this window, and then we can go into the code, and we want to go to the third-person tutorial character.cpp. This is my base character.cpp, so whatever your project name is, or whatever character is your base. And scroll down to the setup player input component function, where we've done all of our mappings and bindings. And we want to bind this ping action just like we do any other event, so that when we press one of the inputs on this action, we can call this function. To do this, you can copy your other bindings in here if you want. So player input component, arrow, bind action. You have to put the name of the input action. For me, it was just ping. It has to match exactly. So make sure this is a direct match of what we put in the project settings. IE underscore pressed means when we press this input, we will trigger this function. We want to do that because we don't want it to trigger on something like release. We want to do it as soon as we press it. This refers to the actual object that this function is going to be called on. And this references the specific instance of the class that we're in. So we are a third-person tutorial character instance in the world, and that's the object that we want to call it on. So this class, and then the function that we are going to call. We don't have this function yet, so we need to go make it. I called mine toggle ping. Let's go into third-person tutorial character.h, scroll down to our functions, and I've made this new one, void toggle ping. Now this is going to be the function that places or removes a ping marker. However, right now we're just worried about creating the ping, and once we get that working, we can do more with it. So I've called it void toggle ping, as I said. It's not a U function, so I can't call it from Blueprint, but you can add that if you'd like. I just have no reason to at the current time. Once you make this function, you can go back into your third-person tutorial character.cpp, and now we can call this function. So ampersand a third-person tutorial character : toggle ping. And so now we press the ping button and we call the toggle ping function. The next thing we need to do is make the toggle ping function. So I'm going to scroll down to where I want to add this. And here we are. So toggle ping. So void a third-person tutorial character : toggle ping. Make sure you add this in here. And we're going to add all this logic you see inside of it. But before we add the logic inside of this function, let's go ahead and make the base ping class, because we need an actual class that we can spawn when we press this button, and when it finds a location to actually spawn that object, we need the object to spawn. I'm going to go back into Unreal Engine. I'm going to launch this again. Once we are in the editor, we can go to the C++ classes section and go into the folder that we want to put this class. Right click, new C++ class, and you can use a common class here and just select actor if you want, or you can search all classes and search for whatever you want. I am just going to use a basic actor, so either way will work. Then I can go to next. I called mine base ping. Now I've already done it, so it won't let me do it, but as long as you don't have a class by this name, you will be perfectly fine to use that. And then you just hit create class. And once you do this, it is going to create the actual base ping class for you. And if you're using Visual Studio to launch like I am, it will link up and add these in here and open them up for you automatically. With live code that Unreal Engine has, there's a good chance that it will work without you having to close the engine. But after I got the base ping classes set up, I like to close because I just feel it is safer to relaunch the engine after adding the new classes like that. I'm going to go ahead and stop this once I see my baseping.cpp and baseping.h. Then I want to go to them, so let's start in baseping.h. This is the class. This is actually all default. I haven't added anything for this. This is what happens when you make a child of the actor class. One thing I want to do, because it always bugs me with this class, is I just want to move the tick function next to the constructor. It's not at all required. I just like it more that way, so that when you're in these small classes, you don't do public, protected public. You just have two different namespaces. So I'm going to do that. And then in baseping.cpp, I don't do anything at all. This is the default for this as well. Right now, this is just a wrapper class. We are going to add a lot more to this in the future, but now I just have a class that I can spawn, and that's what's most important. So after creating this class, we want to make sure that we can access it in the character. And to do that, we can go to our third-person tutorial character.h and include our new class. So I've added hashtag include baseping.h. And remember that when including files and other .h files in Unreal, they have to be above the .generated.h file include. If they're not, you will get errors, so make sure to put it above the .generated.h. Once you've included the baseping.h, we can go ahead and make a variable for it. And the reason I want to make a variable here is because we're going to be spawning the ping actor in the code. We have not assigned a mesh or a sprite or a texture to this base ping class in the code. I'm going to do that in the blueprint. And if we're going to do it in the blueprint, we need to know what blueprint class we should spawn. You have a few methods of doing this. A very, very simple way that you might have seen in some of my other tutorials is to use a T subclass of, and that's what we're going to do. So let's scroll down to the variables in the character class. And I made a new one for this episode, and it is going to store the class for the ping object. It's a T subclass of class A base ping called ping class. So the way this works, any class that is either a base ping or a child of it will show up in this list and we can select it. So we know that we are going to want to use some class related to base ping, but it could be a blueprint child, it could be another code child, and we need to know which one we're going to spawn. Since this is the base one, we don't necessarily want to spawn this one all the time in the future. We may want to spawn different types of pings for different scenarios. But we still know it's going to be of class base ping. So T subclass of angled brackets class and then the class name, which for me is base ping. The A in the front stands for actor. It's the actor prefix. And then closing angled bracket and then the name of the variable, which is going to be ping class. Now I made this U property so that we can set it in the blueprint because the blueprint character does have access to the other blueprint classes. So the blueprint ping class that we make will be able to be assigned to this variable. In this U property, I have it edit anywhere, so we can change the values anywhere within the blueprints, and a category of ping, just so we know how to find it. Now that is our ping class variable set up. So we can do our behavior, set our function up, and spawn our ping object without ever seeing the actual ping itself. Let's go back to the third-person tutorial character.cpp and look at the toggle ping function now. At the beginning of this episode, you likely saw those red lines that were being drawn from the camera into the wall or into the object that we were hitting before the ping was spawned. That was a debug line that we were using just to demonstrate where the line was coming from. The real thing that we need to use to determine the collision is called a line trace or a ray trace. And essentially, it's draw a line, see if the line collides with any object. If it does, return data about that object, and potentially do other behavior, such as spawn our ping object at that location. And to do this, we need to make 4 different variables. We need to make a hit result. Hit result is what gets generated when a line trace collides with an object. So Unreal will know that the line trace has hit an object. It will create a hit result, and we can set a variable equal to that to obtain all the information, such as what class it was, where it was hit, and things like that. So we want to make an fHitResult variable, just called hitResult. And we don't need to set it to anything right now. We're going to do that after the line trace is created. Then we need to make one called collision rules, and these are the fCollision query params. Basically, the line trace needs to know what it can and can't collide with, just like any other object in the world. And we need at least some way to track this, even if we just leave it default. So we need to make an fCollision query params variable, and I called it collision rules. These next ones are very important. So we have start location and end location. To draw a line, you need 2 points. We need start and end. We want the start to be either where our character is or where the camera is. It doesn't really matter. We just need to have some sort of reference point. Now, in the future, we're going to have crosshairs that our character will be looking around and being able to interact with things using. And so the start location can be anywhere that we are going to draw the line from. I choose to just do it from the follow camera. The follow camera is something that exists within the third-person template that we used to create this third-person action RPG tutorial series. So the follow camera is basically just the camera that we're looking through. The follow camera is a pretty good method of starting this line trace because it has a very similar rotation and location to where the character is looking. There's already a way to get the follow camera without having to set anything up by calling the function getFollowCamera that exists automatically within this class when you use the template. It's right here, getFollowCamera returns a camera component. So we're going to call it getFollowCamera. And once we have the camera, we want to call it getComponentLocation. It is going to return the location of that camera in world space. And locations are vectors. We want to have a start location and end location vector. That's exactly what we want. We want the location of the follow camera as our starting location. So f vector start location equals get follow camera, get component location. The end location, we want to use that same behavior, but we need to put it farther past at the actual object we want to hit. Now, typically this is where the character is looking. And using the forward vector of the follow camera, we can determine that. We do need a distance though, and that's something we'll have to set up. So before we go into this end location variable, let's go to the third person tutorial character.h one more time, and let's go to our variables, and specifically I'm going to my float variables. I'm going to make a new variable called ping distance. So float ping distance, and this is the character's default ping distance. I did make it a U property, edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of ping, so we will be able to access it and edit it in the blueprint. After making this variable, go to third person tutorial character.cpp and scroll up to the constructor where we set all of our default values. And in here, I'm setting my ping distance to be 10,000. That's possibly too far, or it might not be far enough. It depends on your world. So play around with it and change this value to what you want, but 10,000 is fine for now. It will do more than what we need. So going back down to toggle ping, we need to use that distance to set the end location. So f vector end location equals get follow camera, get forward vector. Getting the forward vector means we determine where we are rotated, where we're facing. This is really important because we want to use the forward vector of the camera to determine where we're looking and ultimately where we want the end of the line trace to be, what we're trying to actually line trace against. So an example, if you're playing Apex Legends and you're trying to ping a door, well, if you look at that door and ping, it should do that. And so it's using the forward vector of the camera to know what object you're looking at. We multiply that vector by the ping distance variable that we made because we want to make sure we have enough distance to be able to ping things from there. So even if we're looking at an object, if we don't have the ability to ping that far away, we don't want to ping that object. The line trace is going to stop in the middle of the air or just out in the open. It's not going to reach that object. So we have to multiply by the ping distance. Also, we want to offset this end location by the start location because we want to make sure that the line has point A and point B. We don't want to be doing any sort of weird behavior where we have our start location at a certain point and then the end location is before it. That doesn't make any sense. We want to offset the end location by the start location. Once we have all these parameters, we can actually create the line trace, and to do so, we can do get world, which just gets the actual level, arrow, line trace single by channel. So line trace single by channel is going to create a line trace or create a ray trace using the collision channel that we tell it to use. And if it hits an object, it is going to return the results into a parameter. You can see all the parameters here, but this is what we're using for today. So we have hit result. This first parameter is the parameter that we are going to return data into if the ray collides with an object. So our hit result that we made up here, want to use it right here. Pass that in. Then we have the start and end vectors. So we're going to use start location and end location. The next parameter is the collision channel, the trace channel. And I've chosen ECC underscore visibility, E collision channel visibility. Basically, if it's visible, we can collide with it. And then lastly, we have the collision query params. This will be things like if we want to avoid certain types of collisions. I'm just using the default collision rules here. So the collision rules variable that we made up above, use that here. I've taken that entire line and put it within an if statement because you'll notice that it says returns true if a blocking hit is found. And so if we're able to find a blocking hit, then we know we drew a ray or a line properly and it collided with an object. So I was drawing a debug line to visualize this. You could do it before this if statement and just shoot them out wherever. It's not really going to matter in our case. We're going to actually comment this out anyway because we don't want to draw a bunch of lines when we're pinging things. But I do recommend that you test it out with this debug line so that you can see it working and make sure everything's going as expected. So to actually visualize the line, you can call a function draw a debug line. And then you have to pass in a few parameters here. So your first one is the world or the context. So we're going to do get world. Then we have the start and the end location. The color, which takes in an F color, colon, and then the color that you want. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory, so you can use red, green, cyan, yellow. It will pick up on all of those. Then we have persistent lines, which I'm setting to false. So basically the lines won't stay forever. The lifetime, so how long they last until they go away, 5.0 for 5 seconds. The depth priority, which I'm putting to 0. This is to render on top of other objects. 0 is fine. And the thickness, so how thick the line is, and I put it to 3.0. You can use whatever values you want for those. This is just your debug line. Just make sure you can see a line when we get into testing it in a few minutes. Now the hit result actually has data returned into it when this runs. So we did go into this if statement saying we had a blocking hit. The hit result has all the information about the object we hit and things like that. It does check to see if there's a blocking hit and stores this variable. So I like to do another check, another if, and make sure that the hit result.be blocking hit is true. Because if it is, we know that the hit result was filled out properly and we do have a blocking hit, at which point we can spawn our ping actor at that location. And to spawn an actor from the code, we can use get world, arrow, spawn actor, and in the angled brackets, we use a base ping because that's the actor class that we want to spawn. The parameters you have in spawn actor are the class, so the type of class that we're spawning. So we're using a base ping, but we can specify further with the ping class if we choose to. And so we don't have to use a base ping again. We can use the ping class variable. When we get into the blueprints, we're going to use the blueprint ping class as the ping class variable here. And so instead of spawning the code class, we're going to spawn the one with the actual icon that we want to use. Then we have a location and a rotation. For location, I use the hit result.location. Basically, wherever the line trace collided with the object that we're returning data into this hit result for. In the rotation, I'm just using the get follow camera, get relative rotation. It's going to stay the same the whole time in our case, so it's not really right to do, but we're going to billboard it anyway. And billboard means to always rotate it toward the player so that the player can see it. So you don't really have to worry about this, but you do need to pass in a value. So get follow camera, arrow, get relative rotation will work fine for now. At this point, I'm going to launch the editor again. Alright, the editor is back open, and so now I can go into my blueprints where I want to make this object. And I'm going to go to Objects, UI. And I want to make some sort of blueprint class that I can spawn for now, just so we can make sure that everything is working. I'm going to go to Add, and Blueprint Class. I'm going to use my code class, so I'm going to search in all classes for base ping. Select it, and select it. When you do that, you'll get a new class. I called it base ping BP. You can go into here, and once we get in here, we can remove everything in the event graph for now. We don't need it. So empty event graph. When you come in, you might have a default scene root in here. I went ahead and added a sprite that I wanted to use, paper sprite. Renamed it to just regular sprite. And I put in this image that I had, which is actually the player icon from the minimap. Colored red. And you can see my data for everything here, but it's pretty much all default behavior. The whole point of this is just that we have something to spawn right now. Once you have created this base ping BP, we can go to the blueprint character, which for me is the base character BP. And in class defaults, we want to find our ping class. You can scroll down for it, or it should be under the ping category. So you can just search ping. There's actually quite a bit of things here, more than I thought. So it's right here. If you want, if you're having trouble finding it, just search directly for it. And since this is a subclass, remember, it will allow you to pick children of base ping. So we want to make sure we set this in our base character. Instead of making it none, we want to use the base ping BP. So that will be the actor that is spawned when we call the toggle ping function. And there we go, guys. that's how you can set up your initial ping behavior in your third-person action RPG tutorial series. Now, it's far from complete because the sprite doesn't billboard, doesn't rotate toward the player. It doesn't take precedent over other objects, so it renders behind solid objects in the world, which we don't want. We also don't want it to be in the ground. We'll want to raise it up a little bit. But this is all part of the initial logic for pings, and we have a lot more to do to make this into the proper system that we want to use in our game. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and consider joining the Patreon or YouTube membership to support the series and get extra benefits while you're there. If you had any issues with this tutorial, feel free to join the Discord community, become a member, and check out all we have to offer, as well as get free support. Anyway, guys, like I said, I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.